and I'm a professor of peace and conflict studies here, and also the lead researcher for the college's Center for the Study of Religion and Peace, which seeks to use research, dialogue, and public education activities to advance knowledge and awareness of religious contributions to peace, and to enhance the capacity of religious communities to engage conflict constructively, practicing the peaceful values they profess. For those of you who are visiting for the first time, Conrad Grebel University College is a Christian liberal arts college affiliated with the University of Waterloo. Founded by Ontario Mennonites in 1963, Grebel's mission is to seek wisdom, nurture faith, and pursue justice and peace in service to church and society. That mission is the reason we enthusiastically welcome the opportunity to host tonight's conversation about the Saint and the Sultan, religion, conflict, and the search for peace. We were excited not just by the opportunity to hear a fresh narration of a story that is almost 800 years old, but also to reflect communally about the meaning of that story for today. We were hoping that this story could help us to seek wisdom about the ways in which faith can inspire the pursuit of justice and peace, even in the presence of profound conflict. Tonight's event could not have come about without the hard work of many people. And at this point, I would like particularly to thank Sylvia Gonzalez, a graduate of Conrad Grebel's Peace and Conflict Studies Diploma Program. Sylvia, could you stand for a moment? Sylvia's in the very back by the book table. So without Sylvia's creative mind and Franciscan heart, this event would not have materialized. We would not have actually learned about the book, Saint and the Sultan, or made the connection with Paul Moses, the author, and we wouldn't have found the initiative to make this happen, so thank you, Sylvia. The story you're about to hear concerns two people with different beliefs who met in a dissonant time. In their encounter, the differences did not disappear, and yet each found in their own beliefs a basis for engaging the other, and discovered that the other was not just a human being worthy of respect, but also a person of faith and conviction. Insofar as this is a story about an encounter, the event organizing team thought it would not be suitable to leave all the dialogue in the past, 8 centuries ago. We have therefore invited Paul Moses to tell the story of Francis and Sultan al-Kamil from his perspective, followed by a response during which Imam Muhammad Abuelezz will share his own thoughts about the story's meaning. So let me introduce our guests. First, Paul Moses is a professor of journalism at Brooklyn College. As that institution's website can tell us, he was educated at Brooklyn College and at the University of Massachusetts. He pursued a successful 23-year career in daily journalism. He served as city editor, Brooklyn editor, City Hall bureau chief, and religion writer at Newsday's New York City newspaper. His assignments for lead stories on major events included the 9/11 terrorist attack, as well as a 1991 subway crash that killed 5 people, and the story about that won Paul Moses and his team a Pulitzer Prize for spot news reporting. He also reported for the Associated Press and the Dispatch of Union City, New Jersey, and has written for Commonweal, America, CNN.com, The Village Voice, the Star Ledger of Newark, and other places as well. He blogs for Commonweal magazine, and the book about which he will speak, The Saint and the Sultan, and again, copies are available in the back if you like the story. It won the 2010 Catholic Press Association Award for Best History Book of the Year. Imam Muhammad Abuelezz is the Imam at the Kitchener Mosque on Victoria Street. His father was an Imam and a scholar trained at and affiliated with Al-Azhar University, which is one of the oldest universities in the world, founded in the year 970. That's 970, almost 250 years before Francis and Sultan Malik al-Kamil met. It's fascinating to think that we think of old here in North America for university, Harvard University, founded at the beginning of the 17th century, so this goes back further. But the son followed in the footsteps of his parents, earning a BA in Islamic Studies in English in 2001. Later, after working as a researcher for a website called Islam Online, he completed a master's thesis at the University of Georgia on the challenges facing imams in America. Before coming to Kitchener, he served as an Imam at the Islamic Center of Tallahassee in Florida. So we welcome both of you, Paul Moses and Imam Abuelezz. And we await your thoughts on the Saint and the Sultan and your ideas about the relevance of the story to us today. So thank you so much for traveling to be with us.
Thank you very much. I also would like to thank Sister Sylvia and Nathan and Leon Kell also for just hosting me with such hospitality here. Thanks so much. And I'm honored for joining us on this panel. Does that sound okay?
A little bit louder.
A little bit louder? Okay. I guess a little closer to the mic. One of the last things I did during that 23-year journalism career you just heard about was to write my paper's main story on the 9/11 attack, the World Trade Center attack. And right after that, literally, actually the two jobs overlapped a little bit. Right after that, I went to work as a journalism professor full-time. It wasn't exactly the best time to bow out of daily journalism, but the decision had been made much earlier. So while everyone else in New York journalism was following the 9/11 story and then its aftermath and the Afghan war and the war in Iraq that started 10 years ago this month, I was on the journalistic sidelines. And I had also been the religion writer at the paper I worked for, Newsday, so there was really a need for a good religion reporting in that period also. So I was kind of faced with this question, what can I do? You know, we're all faced with a question like that in a time of conflict. And what I can do is I write stories. That's essentially what journalists do. And since I wasn't working on a daily deadline anymore, I could take the long view, and as it turned out, it was a very long view. That began when I saw a reference to a medieval encounter between Francis of Assisi and Malik al-Kamil, the Sultan of Egypt. And it was in this book called The Little Flowers of St. Francis, a account of Francis's life written in the 14th century. And I wondered, could this be true? I thought I knew things about Francis of Assisi, but I never knew that he had met the Sultan of Egypt during the crusade. And I checked into it, and I found that, yes, it had actually happened. It was pretty well documented that Francis went to Egypt in 1219 in the midst of the Fifth Crusade, crossed over to the enemy lines, and insisted on meeting the Sultan, all on his own. And it became a story I wanted to tell, and it became this book, The Saint and the Sultan. I wrote it because I thought that the historic events it recounts could be helpful to us today, whether for creating better relations between Christians and Muslims, or also for showing us ways to respond to warfare. We do need stories from our traditions that offer positive models for Christian-Muslim relations. As we know, there are many historical events that involve conflicts. But that's not the whole story, because in every period from the earliest time of Christian-Muslim relations, we can find examples of peaceful relations as well, and this will be the story of one of them. I think it's good that religious leaders and scholars on a very high level are involved in interreligious dialogue, theological discussions, and things like that. But I think a lot of times, most of us learn through stories. And maybe we can learn effectively that way, more so than we might even from a formal statement that's put out, you know, however necessary and important those statements are. So let's meet the main characters in this story of the Saint and the Sultan. Francis is among the greatest Christian saints. Many consider him to be one of the greatest Christian models. While he's often remembered as a friend of animals and nature, a closer look at his life shows that he was in many ways an insightful critic of the social evils of his time, not so much through what he said or wrote, but more through the example of the lifestyle he adopted. He saw through the greed and pride and violence of the period in which he lived, and he countered it by adopting this radical life of poverty, of penance, and of peace. Sultan al-Kamil was a nephew of Saladin, the great Muslim warrior, and Sultan al-Kamil was a great leader of Egypt. He ruled as a viceroy and then as sultan for 40 years. His statesmanlike devotion to making peace and his tolerance for Christianity made an impression even on the Crusaders. Now, Francis and the Sultan met under terrible circumstances during the Fifth Crusade, which was a brutal war fought in Egypt. Our differences today are minuscule to anything that Francis and the Sultan would have experienced. It was an especially bad time for the Sultan because he was not only dealing with an attack from the Crusaders, but was probably much more worried about a potential attack from the Mongol warriors coming from the east. So it was a very tough time at that point. Now in the Fifth Crusade, the Christians attacked Egypt as a step toward conquering Jerusalem. They laid siege to Damietta, which is still a lovely city at the mouth of the Nile, and it was protected by 3 sets of walls, and kind of a swamp on one side and the Nile River on the other side. And so under this siege, there were about 80,000 people inside those walls who were dying of various stages of disease and starvation. And so Francis arrived on the scene during the siege, and he took it on himself to cross the enemy lines and seek out the Sultan in his camp a few miles south of Damietta. He won the Sultan's respect and was actually permitted to preach for several days before being sent back to the Crusader camp with a military escort. And I always think about how amazing that is, that the Sultan would extend such a courtesy to a Christian, even as the Christian army was bearing down on him. Now, the evidence shows that Francis was deeply affected by this encounter. When he went home, he wrote a new rule, kind of a code of conduct for his order of brothers, in which he urged the members to live peaceably among Muslims and be subject to them. And this was really revolutionary at that time because the war was still going on, the crusade was still being fought. Francis also wrote a prayer that scholars have noted is quite similar to Muslims' prayer of the 99 most beautiful names of God. And he also wrote a letter we have of his urging rulers to initiate a call to prayer, which sounds very much like what he would have witnessed among Muslims in Egypt. The Sultan, for his part, made numerous attempts to achieve a peace treaty in this war. He ultimately won the war and shocked the Christians with the kindness he showed them when he not only spared their lives, but fed them and assisted their exit from Egypt. So those are the basic facts of the story of Francis and the Sultan. And I've interpreted Francis's journey as a mission of peace because, as I argued, Francis quietly opposed the crusade and sought to end the war. Now, both men can serve as useful models for us today. Francis, because he recovered the authentic Christian traditions of befriending enemies, nonviolence, of skepticism for warfare, in a time when the church had become corrupt and violent. The Sultan, because he reflected the Islamic tradition of respect for Christian holiness, and because he strived to avoid needless warfare. I spoke with one Islamic scholar, a number of them, but one, Mahmoud Ayub, told me that the Sultan's respect for Francis reflects a tradition of reverence toward holy Christians, especially monks. The Quran says the monk's eyes brim with tears at the sound of God's name. This tradition goes back to the Prophet Muhammad, who would have encountered Christian monks in the desert. A little more background on the Sultan and Christians. As you know, Egypt has a substantial Christian minority, and it did at that time too. The Sultan was called on to intervene in religious disputes among Egypt's Christians, including a major squabble over who would become the Coptic Patriarch. And he did this with great respect for the traditions of the Christians. He was the Sultan, he could have just ordered what he wanted, but that's not how he did it. One time there was a dispute about whether a mosque or a church should be built on a site in Cairo. He inspected personally. He decided that he found that a church had been there prior, and so he ruled in favor of the Christian minority, and he did take some heat for that. There's a medieval Christian account, a Coptic account, called The History of the Patriarchs of the Egyptian Church, and it's full of praise for Sultan al-Kamil. Now, Francis, I don't think he would have had any idea when he went over to the Sultan's camp that he was known for being sensitive to the Christians in Egypt. He went to the Sultan with the goal of converting him to Christianity, his way of making peace in the crusade. I should say I don't think seeking conversion is a good model for interreligious dialogue today. And those of you who are bothered are smiling because it's an understatement. But within the context of the time, this was the only way it could have happened. That's how it was explained to me by Syed Jose Nasser, who is a Muslim scholar who has played an important role internationally in the dialogue between Christians and Muslims. He told me that what's significant is that Francis approached the Sultan unarmed and without a hint of coercion and full of respect and courtesy. I call Francis's journey a mission of peace because the evidence shows that he opposed the crusade. I should say historians are divided on that. They have a debate that focuses on a passage in one of the earliest medieval biography of Francis by a friar named Thomas of Celano. And in it, he recounts that Francis courageously preaches to the Crusaders against going to battle, and the soldiers jeered him in response. Because of the way the passage is worded, it's not clear if Francis opposed going to battle on that particular day, or if he opposed the entire war. The way I searched for an answer was to look at the larger context, who Francis was and what motivated him, and I think that explains what he was doing in front of the Sultan in Egypt. And when you do that, the inescapable conclusion is that Francis did oppose the crusade. To understand what drove Francis, we need to go back to a dramatic change in his life. He was once the spoiled son of his town's wealthiest merchant, but then he gave up all his belongings for a life of poverty. The reason Francis gave up his old life is that it had led to a devastating experience as a soldier in a war between his town of Assisi and the nearby and more powerful city of Perugia. There was nothing glorious about this war. It was a matter of economic conflict between the aristocrats and some increasingly wealthy merchants. The merchants in Assisi had risen up, drove the aristocrats out of town. They took refuge with their former enemies in Perugia, and Perugia took advantage of this to avenge their honor to go to war with Assisi. Francis, as the son of his town's wealthiest merchant, was outfitted as a knight would be, and that kind of fulfilled his youthful fantasy of living a life of chivalry. As a cavalryman, he had to lead the charge with other knights against the Perugians. Only the Perugians were aristocrats. They had been trained in warfare from the time they were boys. And Francis, was more of kind of a party guy or something. He was not trained in this. Francis quickly saw his friends slaughtered on the battlefield. If you've been to Assisi, it's a hill outside the town by the Tiber River called Collestrata. And they were, hacked apart. And the survivors were hunted down in the woods like animals. And so it was a massacre. Francis was taken prisoner. The reason he wasn't killed was because his father was so wealthy he would make a good ransom. And they didn't have quite yet have the kind of prisons we know of today with bars. They just threw him down in a deep hole that there were these old Etruscan ruins in Perugia. And so he was just deep under the ground in the dark and the damp for a year. And when I wrote the book, I interviewed a U.S. Army military psychologist who's pretty well known, Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman. And I asked him to analyze, what we do know about it. And he said, first of all, he would have clearly suffered severe survivor guilt. But the real damaging thing he said is being deprived of light for a year. He knew that from studies he'd done of prisoners of war in more recent times. And that would break anyone. So clearly Francis was shattered by this experience. I can't say that Francis had PTSD, but he was essentially a disabled veteran at that point. He went through a period of intense solitary prayer, and he briefly tried again to go back to being a knight, and before he got very far down the road with all his finery and his horse, he had some bad dreams, and he turned back. And he gave away his horse, his weapons, his armor, his luxury wardrobe, and he adopted this this radical lifestyle of voluntary poverty. He just wanted to own literally nothing. He didn't want to touch money. He really went to the extreme, right? This provoked many people against him. Just the sight of him living this life of poverty led other people to beat him up. His father especially was shamed by this and was beating him up in the streets. And he submitted willingly because he had adopted a gospel-based nonviolence as the only sane response to the violence that had dragged him down in the past. Even to sympathetic outsiders, it seemed kind of insane. And the Bishop of Assisi said to him one day, it seems to me that it's very difficult and hard in this life to possess nothing in the world. And Francis said, my Lord, if we had any possessions, we should also be forced to have arms to protect them, since possessions are a cause of disputes and strife, and in many ways should be hindered from love. We should be hindered from loving God and our neighbor. Therefore, we wish to have no possessions. Francis was keenly aware that this voluntary poverty that he adopted distanced him from the military life that had nearly destroyed him and was killing so many others. And many of the other young men who joined his growing order were similarly situated young men. Francis is famous for his poverty, but we need to recognize that his poverty connected directly to his peacemaking. Francis also adopted a greeting that was very unusual in medieval Europe at that time: may the Lord give you peace. And he told people that, well, God wants me to use this greeting. And that also bothered people in this period. And so one of his brothers came to him one day and said, people are saying indignantly, what does this greeting of yours mean? And Francis told him not to be embarrassed and told him to continue using it. And Francis said, let them chatter, for they do not understand the ways of God. Don't be ashamed of this, because for one day the nobles and princes of this world will respect you and the other friars for this greeting. And then he ended the story with a remark about how the little people were close to God. The people who didn't understand were the nobles and princes of this world, that is, the people who were the lords of war. Peacemaking was central to Francis's ministry. There are stories of his specific interventions in Arezzo, Bologna, Siena, and Perugia. I particularly like the account in Perugia because those are the people who imprisoned Francis. But he got the idea that Perugia was going to have the same kind of civil war that Assisi had, and he actually went there to try to preach to warn them against it, and the knights, harassed him and taunted him and made fun of him, and he kept preaching at them. It's kind of a neat story. Anyway, these stories show that peacemaking was at the core of his being, that he was repulsed by war, and he transformed his entire life to escape what war had done to him. When he adopted a life of penance, in keeping with the tradition that was in keeping with the tradition in medieval times that soldiers do penance if they had killed in combat. So faced with the extreme violence Francis saw in Damietta, his natural response was to urge that any further warfare be avoided. So, as I write in the book, he was always on the mission of peace. He didn't turn that off when he went to Egypt. There's another context for understanding what Francis was trying to do in his trip before the Sultan. And as a young man, before his military service, he had been the life of the party. And he was really a performer by nature. We remember him now, for example. What is he really most famous for? Right? His kindness to animals, right? And his love of nature also. But we don't necessarily see what he was driving at through his kindness to animals. He would perform these outrageous acts of compassion for if a lamb was being led to the market, he would want to buy it, or if it was a fish, somebody gave him a fish they just caught, he would throw it back in, or he would, preach to the birds, and he would, if a worm was on the sidewalk, he would move it to safety. And these were kind of a performance. I don't doubt that he loved animals, but I think he was also trying to make a certain statement. A performance meant to shock human beings into loving one another. His early biographer, Thomas of Celano, commented, imagine how much love he had for human beings since he showed so much compassion for animals. So Francis was always trying to shock people into repenting for their sins and embracing peace. There's a story, for example, of how he sent some brothers to visit some robbers who were harassing, threatening people and stealing from them. He told them to go with some gifts of bread and wine. And gradually, the brothers were like, scared as anything, but no, go do this. And gradually, these desperados in the hills in Italy somewhere were won over. Now, Francis's unarmed trip to the Sultan was also a kind of performance, a shocking display of nonviolence in the midst of war. He undertook it at a time when the Crusades leaders were divided about whether to accept a peace offer from the Sultan. The Sultan had offered them Jerusalem as a way to end the crusade, as long as there was access for all believers to the shrines there. And the military leader of the crusade, this very dashing French knight named Jean de Brienne, he wanted to take the deal. But the Pope's representative, Cardinal Pelagius, he wanted to conquer all of Egypt, which, from his point of view, would have secured the entire region. At that point, it was when Francis decided to cross the lines to go see the Sultan. The cardinal in charge of the crusade tried to talk him out of it, and even implied, according to one account, that Francis might be disloyal for doing this. But Francis held his ground, and so the cardinal told him that if he was killed, he had only himself to blame. So Francis' decision to cross the battlefield was a very dramatic gesture for peace. He was showing the people in his own camp that it was possible to talk to the other side. And what about the Sultan? He was also an extraordinary figure and a model worth remembering today. After much uncertainty, he managed to triumph in the Fifth Crusade. The Christian leaders didn't understand the flow of the Nile. And so the Sultan's troops, they conquered Damietta and penetrated further into Egypt. And the Sultan's troops were able to trap them by raising sluice gates to lift up the level of the river. So the whole army was trapped in mud and water up to their waists, so they were through. And then after having rejected peace offers, they asked the Sultan for peace. And I just want to read you one brief excerpt from a letter written by one of the architects of the crusade, a fellow named Oliver of Paderborn, who later became a cardinal in the church. The Sultan was moved by such compassion toward us that for many days he freely revived and refreshed our whole multitude. Who could doubt that such kindness, mildness, and mercy proceeded from God? Those whose parents, sons, and daughters, brothers, and sisters we killed with various tortures, whose property scattered, or whom we cast naked from their dwellings, refreshed us with their own food as we were dying of hunger, although we were in their dominion and power. And so with great sorrow and mourning, we left the port of Damietta, and according to our different nations, we separated to our everlasting disgrace. That was the kind of man that Sultan al-Kamil was, as I discovered in researching his life. The Crusaders thought that he secretly wanted to be a Christian because they couldn't understand how he could be so good otherwise. But I think the key to understanding the Sultan is that he was a good Muslim. He was devoted to the teachings of one of the great Sunni scholars, Imam al-Shafi. He built a beautiful dome over the Imam's tomb in Cairo. It's a beautiful and peaceful place to visit. He built religious schools. He had a great interest in Sufism, a mystical approach to Islam, and he brought the leading Sufi poets of the day to his court. His religious advisor was very respected and was steeped in Persian Sufism. And some say the Sultan would have appreciated similarities between Francis and Sufis he knew. One challenge in writing the book was to sort through the different accounts of the meeting between Francis and the Sultan to determine what is true and what's false in them. There are at least 15 accounts from the 13th century of the meeting of Francis and the Sultan, all Western. In general, the later they are, they tend to portray the encounter as confrontational. In my view, the closer the event, the account was, the more credible it is. Later accounts reflected the political currents of their time and also controversies that raged within the Franciscan order after Francis' death. We can follow this quickly. I'll just tell you a little bit about some of the art. I don't have slides of it, but it's in the book. The work on the cover of the book is the earliest depiction, dated to about 1245. It's in the Basilica of Santa Croce in Florence. And it shows the encounter entirely peaceful. Francis is here. The Muslim and his advisors are just listening, they're just talking. And this reflects the earliest and most credible account written by a French bishop, Jacques de Vitry, who took part in the crusade. He wrote a letter home. He mentioned it in a letter home. That's the early. And then a couple of years later, he wrote a sort of a history that included the crusade. And he mentioned it again in a similar way. Entirely peaceful. Now, in the book, I have the artwork in there. There are two works attributed to the great artist Giotto, or Giotto, if you prefer in Italian, which were painted around 1300, which is 81 years after the actual event. And these use a scene based on a biography of Francis written by St. Bonaventure in the 1260s, so that's more than 40 years after the fact. And supposedly, under that account, Francis had gone in there and challenged the Sultan's religious advisor to an ordeal by fire, trial by fire. For a lot of reasons, I reject that, because A, there had been a church council in Francis' time, 1215, that banned doing that, said Christians should not do that. So Francis was in tune to these things. I don't think he would have disobeyed in that way. Also, it totally conflicts with what Francis says in his own writings about loving the enemy and about living peacefully among Muslims. And finally, as I explained at length, there was great political pressure on Bonaventure to recreate Francis in a certain way. It has to do with some scandals going on within the Franciscan order at that time involving heresy charges, and so it kind of helped to show Francis as ultra-obedient and antagonistic to the so-called enemy. So I don't want to spend too much time on that, but it's interesting to see these paintings. They really kind of represent the image that was passed down through the centuries, because they're such major art. And then there was another painting about 150 years later that, and you have to look at the time, 1452, just before the fall of Constantinople, time of renewed conflict. So we see a painting now that really reflects a more intense conflict. In that one, there's a story that dates to about 100 years after Francis died that says while he was in Damietta, a woman tried to seduce him. And it's a miracle story. Francis supposedly removed his clothes, got into a blazing fire in the fireplace to, respond to this. Anyway, the medieval document calls her, by the way, a certain woman who was very beautiful in face and body, but very foul in mind and soul. Anyway, in the painting, which is in the book, page 216, the artist, many years later, combines the story of the woman with the story of Francis before the Sultan. So now we see the woman in the painting with the Sultan, and the caption of it says that the Sultan had taken this woman and was trying to tempt Francis. And the reason I find that so interesting is that I just read to you what the actual Crusaders thought in real life, right? They gave a glowing account of Sultan al-Kamil, but as the years passed, we see this kind of political baggage attached to the story, and now the Sultan is being portrayed, for political reasons, as kind of a smarmy, immoral villain, right? So I guess you could say that the encounter between the saint and the Sultan didn't immediately accomplish much in terms of interreligious understanding. Christians and Muslims did continue to fight each other. But in recent years, and I think Imam Muhammad will have something to say about this, the story of Francis and the Sultan has been rediscovered and has inspired people to engage in peacemaking. Now, if we look closely at the historical account, I think we see some elements of peace building that you here at Conrad Grebel College could probably state much better than I can. The first point I noticed in my research about Francis was that he disarmed his rhetoric. When you read the medieval chronicles, they're full of stinging remarks about the enemy. But Francis did not speak that way. I see a second element of peacemaking in Francis's decision to cross the battlefield. The terrain Francis crossed would have, to get to the Sultan's camp, would have been filled with reminders of the battle just fought there a short time before. Dismembered bodies, these battles were very grisly. Dead horses, scorched earth, because they had some sort of fiery petroleum they used to hurl at each other. It's never, what I draw from that is that it's never an easy trip to cross over to the other side. There will always be memories of past disputes and outrages, whether you're dealing with matters of religion or race or nationality or other kinds of cultural conflicts. It takes courage to cross the battlefield, and it can mean being criticized by your own people, just as Cardinal Pelagius warned Francis not to go. Another aspect we see in Francis and the Sultan is the great courtesy and respect they showed one another. When Francis addressed the Sultan, he started out by saying, "If you wish to hear me," and that word "if" is significant because he was not threatening in any way. Civility is very important. Both Francis and the Sultan were open to the unexpected, another facet of peace building, I think. If we want to make peace, we can't count on everything going according to plan, because it doesn't. It would have been easy for the Sultan to take one look at Francis and Friar Illuminato, the friar who went with him, and then throw them in jail as prisoners of war. Instead, he decided to listen to it. He was open to the unexpected. Francis was also open. Today it's church teaching to value what is good and holy in non-Christian religions such as Islam. But there was nothing like that in Francis's own time that would have told him to do the same. Quite the contrary, the two sides demonized each other. Yet the evidence from Francis's own writings show us that, like many Christians who traveled to predominantly Muslim countries today, Francis came away impressed by Muslim spiritual practices. He was open to that. And finally, the experience of Francis in Damietta shows us that for all our own effort, we cannot expect immediate results. Francis certainly didn't get them, and like Francis, we may never even know what the results will be. Francis's proposal to live peacefully among Muslims failed to catch on. The years after he returned home from Egypt were very difficult for him, a time when he was put on a pedestal as a living saint, but became frustrated that no one was listening to him. The Crusades continued for the rest of the 13th century, long after Francis died and long after the Sultan died. And yet we are talking about this encounter nearly 800 years later. Francis and the Sultan planted seeds for better relations between Christians and Muslims, and after a long interval, I think they're sprouting. It's just a story, one brief and sometimes overlooked historical encounter, but stories can resonate with meaning, and this one does because Francis and the Sultan offer us a path for today. Each firmly believed in his own faith tradition. For them, that didn't mean hatred or violence. Rather, it meant they respected each other and preferred peace to war. Thank you.
Now we'll hear from Imam Abuelez.
Take it as he used to. Assalamu alaikum. We know this is a greeting of Islam, and it is even adopted by Saint Francis, as Paul just stated. I really thank Paul and thank Lisan and thank Leon for inviting me to this event, and I'm thankful to every one of you who came today and dedicated 2 hours from his time for peace building event. Really, it was a lot and means a lot that you are interested in such kind of topic. Excuse me. I just have a PowerPoint presentation. I think it is more. As you see that this picture, I only choose it because it doesn't have this woman in the. So I went through the different pictures and different paintings about Saint and Crusade, and everyone has its own hidden meaning and different interpretation. And I found this one is more neutral, a little bit, and both of them are hugging each other, having good relation that we wish to have with each other. I will start from what Paul ended, which that this story resulted in or led for current good work among Muslim and Christian. And this was what happened with me. My previous experience with the Saint and Sultan story, it started in Florida when I was working as an Imam in the Tallahassee community, and Deacon bit the one on my left side approached me and for starting a program between the Muslims and the Christians in the Catholic Church, and the topic is about the Sultan and the Saint. And this is another book written about that topic that covers more social work and social justice issues that Muslim and the Christian can work together for it. And this program went for 2 months. 2 months, we meet weekly for 2 hours. And we discuss Trinity, we discuss oneness of God, we discuss the Quran, we discuss the Bible, we discuss everything that you think could be happening between a Muslim and a Christian, but in a good and warm situation, in a way that we love each other or respect each other and appreciate our differences. And the group, there is 7 Muslims and 7 Catholics, and for 2 months is having this kind of relation that ended with helping and doing a good deeds, or if you can say, or we worked on Project Downtown. The Muslim students of Florida State, they used to do a project downtown for helping and feeding the homeless. And the church has a lot of resources at that time, and so they supported the students with food and some others. We also went to their soup kitchen, and we were serving and providing food for the homeless there. Those who don't have any relation to us by religion, except that they are our brothers in humanity, if we can say that. Just they are humans. This group from Muslim and Christian, they were doing that. And I will, if you forgive me, I will take you to a different dimension or another still more theological about what Islam as a religion says about peace building, having peace with non-Muslims, with quote unquote, as some people say, kafir, or non-believers, or whatever. Because a lot of Muslims, sometimes, or some Muslims, they mix between issues and between contexts, between those who are peaceful and those who are violent, and those who are good to you and those who are bad to you. And they put all the orange on one basket, which is not the way to be a fair and just person. The word dialogue in our religion means hiwar. Hiwar. The word dialogue means hiwar. And the word hiwar is mentioned in the Quran. It's mentioned in the Quran between 2 persons. One was a believer and the other was a non-believer. And this story tells us how the believer person was arguing with his friend. And the Quran said his friend, his companion. The Quran mentioned that he وَقَالَ لِصَاحِبِهِ وَهُوَ يُحَاوِرُ, while he was arguing and making conversation with him. Do you deny him who created you from dust, then from a drop of semen, then he made you a perfect man? So this was a conversation, and this is the only one that God mentioned the word dialogue. the word dialogue in Arabic, which means حوار. And it was between a Muslim and a non-Muslim, or you can say, or a believer and unbeliever. Because a lot of people think that حوار and that dialogue only between their group. No, it is with others, with those who don't share your beliefs. You can do that kind of حوار. The Prophet Muhammad himself, there's a very nice hadith, and the hadith is the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad himself, is not the Quran. Muslims believe the Quran is the book of God, but Prophet Muhammad, he also has some sayings and some statements by him. It's not the Quran. And he, in one of his sayings, he's saying that souls are like recruited troops. Those who come and get to know each other, they will probably develop mutual understanding. But those who don't know each other, they are likely and they are more likely to have dispute. Which means that hadith, we understand from that hadith as Muslims that dialogue or hiwar, as you see the word in Arabic, means in Islamic understanding conversation between individuals or groups. The goal of dialogue is not to eliminate differences of opinion and conviction, but to gain understanding and acceptance of these differences. It is not about seeking to defeat or silence the others, but learning, understanding, and increasing knowledge of those others. Know each other, break the ice between each other, and break these kinds of stereotypes. But if we come to debate, and I want to challenge you, and you want to challenge me, we will go out from that lecture or that debate or that panel with something in our heart as everyone. We are not going to cooperate outside to do something good. Because you already defeated or challenged or abused me, as I believe. The interfaith dialogue in our modern time has a lot of support by the Quran itself. The meanings of the interfaith dialogue in our modern time, it has been mentioned in the book of God, in the divine book for Muslims, but in other terms or other values. The first thing that supports the interfaith dialogue is the term ta'aruf. In Arabic, ta'aruf means that we come to know each other and understand each other and build relations. God said in the Quran, O mankind, we have created you from a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes that you may know each other or one another. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. So لِتَعَارَفُوا in Arabic means to know each other. So imagine that this is what Quran, the book of Muslims, is saying for Muslims. So Muslims should do more, should work hard. Really, I am doing it to my community. I'm doing it to Muslims, to the Muslim community, that they should work hard, because this is what their book is encouraging them to know other people and to break the ice with them. Another term mentioned in the Quran comes under the interfaith dialogue is islah. The word islah means reconciliation, building bridges, restoring relations, especially that was broken, and resolving conflict. The Quran calls the bridge builder muslihun. God says about that in Quran, about those who bridge builders. God calls them and gives them a name as muslihun. If any one of you interested in Arabic, so please forgive me for that. Maybe it is hard for you, but I found this is the only way to do something good and explain from where we are coming and why we should cooperate and make peaceful cooperation with others. And this word, when it is mentioned in the Quran, God says about it, there is no there is no good in their secret conferences unless one enjoins charity, justice, or conciliation. Conciliation means islah, between people. The one who does this to seek Allah's pleasure, we shall give him a great reward. God says, Islah bayna an-nas, reconciliation between people. The word people in the Quran, especially when it is mentioned, it's mentioned with no differentiation between anyone. All people. This word, what we call nas. When God in the Quran mentioned nas, people, all humankind. Because God always sometimes mentions believers to mean Muslims, especially when he gives them a specific command for them, or he addressed them separately. But when he addressed humanity, he says this word, Islah bayna an-nas. So, and in fact, what is interfaith dialogue? Interfaith dialogue is nothing more making conciliation, restoring relations with others, which is as the Quran said. Another term, another value in the Quran comes under interfaith dialogue is ihsan, is to be muhsin, is to do the best thing, the best act, to beautify, to do your act in the best way. And it is mentioned, the Quran asks Muslims who engage in interfaith dialogue to speak and act in civilized manner. Even if their partner don't do that. Don't be harsh. You don't need to be harsh. You don't need to be abusive in a good way. Talk in a good way. So God says, the good deed and the evil deed cannot be equal. Rebel the evil with one which is better. Then verily he, the one between you and him, there is animosity or enmity, he will be as a close friend. God is saying that about your enemy. In the Quran, God says that you should treat him in the best way, your enemy. And this is what you say in the Bible about Jesus, love your enemy. Love your neighbor. Love your enemy. The same in the Quran. The same values. I know some Muslims have a problem with love, by the way. The word love. Oh, love. No. There is a difference between friendship and what we call loyalty and supporting against your nation. What al-Kamil did. He had a good relation with Assisi, with Saint Francis. He didn't betray his nation. If he betrayed his nation to please Saint Francis, this was something that everyone Muslim refused. But he was doing good and conveying a good message to Saint Francis. Another term, another value is called ta'awun. Ta'awun means cooperation, to cooperate. And a lot of Muslims, to say that some Muslims think that ta'awun is only with Muslims. We cooperate with the same, but others, I don't know. Why? This term, when God mentioned it, He mentioned it to cooperate with the non-Muslims. God said in the Quran, and don't let the hatred of some people in those who prevented you once from the sacred mosque lead you to transgression and hostility on your part. Help each other or one another, which means ta'awanu, in righteousness and piety, but don't help one another in sin and rancor. So when a non-Muslim, when a Christian is inviting me and extending his hand for helping the homeless, for doing a good project for the common good, for the community at large, I should extend my hand. I should cooperate with him. No problem. This is something good. And this ayah is related about the Muslims, the people of Quraysh, the pagans, the people of Mecca, prevented Prophet Muhammad and his companions from entering Mecca, entering the sacred mosque to do pilgrimage, to do Hajj. So some Muslims, out of revenge, they wanted to prevent some other tribes, non-Muslim tribes, from going to Mecca, also to treat them the same. A lot of people do that, revenge. And mix revenge with revenge, and they put it under religion. Revenge doesn't come under religion. There are rules. There are issues. So God said, no, we don't revenge like that. We cooperate for the good. Leave them. Don't do the same as they did to you. Leave them to go and do Hajj. Even when we cooperate, which means ta'awun, we cooperate. God says, it's not, a Muslim shouldn't only cooperate, but he should compete for doing the good, which means what we call istabiqul khayrat. Fastabiqul khayrat. And this comes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala related that and mentioned that in the Quran regarding the dealing with the people of the book, the Christian and the Jew. God says to the Muslim, fastabiqul khayrat, compete with them in the good. As long as you are not going to come to one, because you are different. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meant it to be that way. So, which means that, in other words, encouraging to compete and outperform non-Muslim when it comes to doing good works and serving people. In other words, if non-Muslims extend their hands in cooperation, peace building, serving the community at large, Muslims should extend their hands even farther. More. If you really a Muslim, if you really a good submitted to Allah, to God. Oh, what about if it comes to argument, debate? No way. This guy wanted to debate me. Like last time when I attended the discussion here with Shabir and Chink, there was a person in the room here. Could I pray? Can I pray for you? I said, yes, go. And he prayed. He said, oh, Jesus, guide him. Something like that. Okay, so he wants to brutalize. He thinks that I should convert. Something like that. So when it comes to that, and there is someone he wants to debate and wants to argue with you, God says you should argue in a good way, in the best way. Muslims should display respect for others and argue with them in the best and most gracious way. وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. And I quoted the Quran, the ayah and the verses and the chapters. The Quran also always used to call the Christian and the Jew the people of the book, Ahlul Kitab. The people of the Quran permitted a Muslim to marry from a Christian or a Jewish community, to marry a non-Muslim woman. At that time, 14 centuries ago, I was talking to some brothers who came to Mennonite and other different congregations. They say it was just 20 years ago, this was, or 50 years ago, it was prohibited for a Catholic to marry from Protestant or other dimension, or other religion, or other sect. But 14 centuries ago, Islam allowed that. Yes, it is halfway. It doesn't permit the other side. Because I know that you are going to ask me that question. Yeah, why God, according to the Quran, He allows you to marry a Christian woman. Why doesn't a Muslim, a woman to marry a Christian man? No, we allow it halfway. Only we are better than the Jewish and the Christian in that side. We don't allow anything. Okay? Let us be fair. Okay? Give us a clap for that. I'll quick go through the life of the Prophet Muhammad. I know I don't take more than that. The relation between Muslim and non-Muslim by the Prophet Muhammad himself. How he applied that. How he, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, as we say, and to praise him, how he applied the values of the Quran. Because his wife, Lady Aisha, used to say he was like a Quran walking on earth. Which means he applied the values and the principles of our book in our life. So he was an example for us. He first, I will tell you that, there was a war between the Byzantine and the Persian. I didn't want to mention, I took it out. I said maybe people say, oh you prefer a Byzantine Christian, or you should be equal, something like that. But anyway, he preferred and made prayer and dua, supplication, that the victory will be for the Byzantine because they are Christian, they are closer to Muslims more than the pagans, the Belgians who used to worship idols or something like that, or fires. So they prefer, and it is called Ar-Rum, the Romans. There is a chapter in the Quran called Ar-Rum, it is the Romans, or something like that, because it gives support for the Christians. But another relation happened between the Muslims and the Christian very early 14 centuries ago, is that when the Muslims were persecuted in Mecca, Prophet Muhammad heard about the king of Ethiopia or Abyssinia. And he said, there is a just and fair king there. No one will be oppressed under his authority. And he encouraged the Muslims to migrate. 5 years after his revelation and his mission, they migrated to Abyssinia and they lived there for about 15 years. Safe, in a good place, in a good community, protected by that king, the non-Muslim king. Yes, we have some narration say he believed after that, but in the beginning he was a Christian, and the Prophet said he is a Christian man, he's a just man. Go and, I'm saying that because I know some people will come and say, oh Sheikh, no Imam, he became a, okay, so. I'm here neutral. I am trying to be objective as much as I can, okay? Between Muslims and also the Prophet Muhammad, when he migrated to Medina, he established the constitution of Medina. He wrote the constitution of Medina. It was the first constitution at that time to be written like that. Between Muslims, the non-Muslims, the Christian, the Jew, everyone was living in the Medina, in the city of the Prophet at that time. He was protected, and he will be one nation. One nation. Ummatun wahida. In the Quran, as in the text, one nation. Protect each other and safeguard each other. Interfaith dialogue with Christian delegation from Najran, close to Yemen. It is a city close to Yemen, or Yemen. The Christian delegation came to Prophet Muhammad. They had interfaith dialogue. They debated a little bit. They even went to challenge. The story of Saint Francis say that, oh, Saint Francis told the king, brought fire and I will throw myself on the fire, and you brought your scholars like me and they will throw themselves in the fire. Of course, a scholar like me said, no, we are not going to throw ourselves in the fire. If you want to go, go. So this is a story also in some painting it showed that the fire and the Saint Francis and the scholar, something like that. It may be true, it may be wrong, it doesn't matter, but this happened according to our narration with the Prophet Muhammad, but not fire. Prophet Muhammad said to them, we can pray, the liar of us will be perished. They said no. Anyway, he made a treaty with them, a good pact, and gives them a protection for their churches, for their cross, for their children, property, everything, to be a citizen in Peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula at that time, because it came under Prophet Muhammad's authority at that time and domain. And they lived safe, and they went back home while they didn't convert to Islam. They kept their religion. And even, they say in the story, it tells that the time for their own prayer came, and they were in the masjid. They were in the mosque of the Prophet Muhammad. And the Prophet, what do you think? If you are living 14 centuries ago and one wants us to pray from another religion in your place of worship, his own prayers, at that time people were killing each other for the difference of the religion. So, but Prophet Muhammad allowed and permitted, tolerated. I know some people don't like the word tolerance, but in our language it has a very good connotation. Maybe in your language, in the English language, it has some bad, I tolerate you. But in our called tasamuh, is forgiveness, mercy, love. It has a lot of good connotation in our culture. So the Prophet permitted that and let them pray in his mosque. I will end just give me, do we need this under this question? Do we need such a kind of dialogue that I talk about?
Mosque has been smeared with threatening graffiti, words and images so offensive, police have called in the...
Just 2 days ago.
CTV's Art Beaumont has been speaking with police and members of the mosque today. Art, we now have surveillance video of 2 suspects.
We do, Megan. Police and the victims of this hoping that someone can identify them. But much of what was spray painted is much too offensive to even broadcast.
It was done in darkness Tuesday night to a house of worship. Derogatory references to Muslims, inflammatory and threatening. Mohammed Sayed says it's sad and painful to see such things.
There are some comments very specific about the faith group, about the religion, about the incidents. So exactly like that person was like, know what that person was doing. It's not something like just random act.
Suspects caught on security video Tuesday evening. Police believing that someone should recognize them or their clothing. It's become a top priority to find them.
Trying to clean away the hateful words and images. This crime has been escalated way beyond being just mischief or graffiti.
Due to the fact that of the type of information that was put on those walls, we're moving upstairs to our hate crimes unit that's going to take over the investigation.
Hate inflicted on not just a place of worship, but to a school where young children come to learn, where tolerance and kindness are taught. Mohammed says the words painted are not something they or anyone should see.
But like when I start reading the comments on the back especially, I was like, wow, this is somebody was thinking out very clearly what they are doing.
Perhaps the most disturbing thing of all, he says, that some people still have such thoughts.
Now, late this afternoon, I received word that the Council on American Islamic Relations Canada is now urging police to pursue this incident as a hate crime. Megan?
Thanks, Art.
The world's most magical musical is landing in Cambridge. Mary Poppins.
Oh, wow.
Dunfield Theatre, Cambridge, March 6th.
No, it was not intended. Yeah, so do we need, I says yes, we need. Muslims before non-Muslims need to do that dialogue, to educate others. I have a story about, you know this movie, cartoon movie called How to Train Your Dragon? Have you heard, anyone watched that? That is a story, very nice story, that has a very good theme, which is that the people used to fight the dragons. And only one child said, no, I cannot, I'm not gonna fight, it's like Saint Francis. I'm not gonna fight. His father said, they killed us. He said, you killed hundreds and thousands of them. So, and then there was a very fascinating statement from that boy in that movie saying, when he got to know the dragons, like Muslims, okay, he said, oh guys, all what we know about you is so wrong. He said that to the dragon, all what we know about you is wrong. So, yes, when we come together, we'll know about each other. And this is with Sister Idris and the Muslim Association, Muslim Social Service in the Trinity Church. The Muslim, serving the food there, and I'm here shouting. Here, Muslim girls, Muslim women with other members of the Trinity Church, they are serving the food. So I will end with that. We need to engage in interfaith dialogue badly. It helps to remove spreading of religious radicalism, bigotry, prejudice, and creates respectful means that increase understanding, respect, cooperation, building bridges, narrow the gap between ourselves and our communities. Thank you.
We've just had 2 very rich presentations. I think it would behoove us to have some further dialogue as a whole group about many themes that emerged. But I think before we do that, it would be nice to stand up, stretch a little bit, talk to our neighbors about what they heard and how it was similar or different to what we heard, and perhaps even to try a few of those treats in back that were brought to us by Osman of the Intercultural Dialogue. If you just stand up, Osman, and wave your hand and say thank you, Osman, for bringing that good food for us to encourage good thoughts. And during this break, please, I hope you'll stick around. I would invite you to write down any questions that have emerged from you as a result of what you've heard so far, and bring them either to me or to Leon. Leon, if you stand up and back. And we will use those questions that you write down for the second half, and we'll give a chance for our speakers to say some more and share some more with us. So thank you. Please stick around. Leon Kale will be serving as the moderator. Let me give Leon a quick introduction. In addition to being a very dynamic logistics person for this event, Leon Kale, he has a larger role with this season with the Center for the Study of Religion and Peace as the events coordinator, and he has his own very passionate involvement with interfaith relations and bridge building in the water of the region more generally. He's been doing this for a number of years. Leon provides leadership to a group of Muslims, Christians, and Jews who meet monthly for a meal and discussion. He was actively involved in the private sponsorship of Palestinian refugee families from Iraq who were trapped in Syria. And these sponsorships have included a number of churches and 2 mosques. Last year, he helped organize a series of screenings, including one here at Grebel, of the documentary Waging Peace, Muslim and Christian Alternatives, which aired in the United States on television. And the documentary included a segment about interfaith bridge building work here in Ontario. Leon is currently working on a Master of Arts degree in Ministry and Spirituality at Regis College in Toronto. So, Leon, thank you for your role this evening.
Thank you. I think at this point we're going to give you 2 gentlemen an opportunity to kind of respond to each other, and looking forward to that discussion.
I'd just say it was a marvelous and very focused presentation on specific concepts and words in Islam and how they relate to interfaith, interreligious dialogue. And I just thank you very much for it. The book that Imam Muhammad showed you, I talked to the writers, while they were working on it. They had contacted me, and I was very excited to see what they were doing. They quote what I wrote quite a bit, and they used the story of St. Francis. They kind of based it on what I wrote, but their goal is to show how that can be applied in interreligious dialogue. And what they found was there are similarities, particularly between social justice traditions in the 2 religions, and they felt that one of the best ways to bring people together is actually to do things together. So you saw the soup kitchen, and I endorsed the book. My little blurb is on the back cover, but it's the kind of thing I was really happy. I just wanted to try to define the story and what happened, and a little bit on what it means, but more like a journalist, get the story, But I was hoping that it would lead to something like that, and so I was very pleased to see that book, and even more pleased to see that what you were doing based on what they wrote. Thank you.
I would say that you already inspired people with your book to do that, and I appreciate that. And I really learned a lot from that previous experience with the Catholics, and worked very well for me to get a good experience and know others, and have the ability to accept the difference. And really this is what I learned from the interfaith. I came from Egypt. I came with the same mentality like you can say any immigrant or any overseas person who comes from outside. I can say I was a closed-minded person, but by time, by knowing other people, by talking with them, I started to see the other side. And my professor in the University of Georgia, Dr. Abuelezz, he was a white American Muslim. He used to say in his classes, you just need to, when you are wearing your glass, eyeglass, you just need to know that you are wearing it to give the bias. Yeah, but some people don't know that they are wearing a glass, and they see the world are black or blue or whatever. But you can see the world, yes, through your glass, but you know that you are wearing it. Of course, it will be better if you take it out. Yeah, but at least you know your prejudice and your bias. Be honest and good with others. And I just want to say, please forgive me, and I apologize for my loud voice, who may harm some people. You should accept this difference, because I'm coming from Egypt. There's a way we trained and we learn how to do it, but maybe I need to work on my skills and to do it in a nice way. Maybe next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Not everything is a call to worship. I don't know how they did it before they had loudspeakers, but I'm sure they trained to project.
How they train you with no speakers?
We have a few questions.
Yes.
Pass those back. I'm going to ask the other one first, though. I get to read them. You get to respond. I think this one I tried to, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but I think it's a really good question. And then a lot of what we talked about is sometimes the easiest way to get to know someone is to be doing something with them. You know, you've talked about working side by side in the soup kitchen, serving food. We've experienced that in some of our group when we make quilts together. But the question really is, what when you only have words? So when we're not working together on something, how is it that we can kind of help convert people to tolerance, to view people differently? So if we meet someone at a party or something like that, how is it that we can do that? I'll put that to both of you.
I mean, I would say, going back to the story of Francis and the Sultan, just through example, I think is the best way. How you relate to other people. It's a very quick, short answer.
In the Quran, that says, "Idfa' billati ahsan," reply and with the best and good action. I mean, which means your action, our actions, our good deeds. When we deal with people, they say action speaks louder than words. So if I speak with you for 100 years, for 100 years, for a month, or for 3 hours, but if you see my actions is opposite, you will react to my actions. So I believe if we want to change this attitude between different communities, is to come together and do something good, like what I showed in the presentation. Serving, helping, of course, all those people in the church who saw us at that day, even the staff, even those who were serving the food from the crew or the staff from the church, they said, "We love that day, it is a very delicious food." This is better than talking or something, anything. It's something that really tangible. That's what I answered your question.
There's a very good book by some social scientists called American Grace, How Religion Divides and Unites Us, Robert Putnam and David Campbell. And the research really shows, social science research shows really very well that when people just do things together, when they work together in the same place and they're from different backgrounds, that's how attitudes change. When children go to school and there's different types of kids in their class, that generation is different from the one that didn't have different types of kids in their class. So I just think it's through example and being together, I think it is a lot of it. What you can actually say to change somebody's behavior, I'm not quite sure. I think it's more in, your example.
Thank you, gentlemen. I might add, too, I think sometimes here in the West more so, we are afraid to ask. We are afraid to engage the other in conversation because too often we've done that with the purposes of converting. But you can learn a lot. And sometimes you can pick a safe topic. How many here are familiar with Little Mosque on the Prairie? Right? And so that can be a conversation starter. It doesn't need to be dramatic. I had an Egyptian coworker, and we would talk about Little Mosque on the Prairie. And there was this one episode where she wanted to do prayers, and her husband grabs the bath mat. And so you can do prayers with that. And my colleague turned and he said, "Here, come with me. We were about to go to lunch." And so I followed him. And we went to the nurse's station, and they're curled up in the drawer were the prayer mats. And so that was where he was going to pray every day. But if I hadn't asked that question, I wouldn't have learned. And so often we hesitate to ask the question. So it's not just actions. I think it's also, an invitation. And I think I'll maybe move to the next question here, which is, you know, a lot of the accounts of the meeting, St. Francis, involve the European accounts. So the question really is, what about from the Muslim accounts? Is there a history of that or writings on that particular encounter, and can you offer anything? I'll maybe start with you, Mohammed, but give you more time to think. Or do you want to?
No, whatever. So I think Paul, he did a research on them. He knows that if he doesn't have a count or not.
Yeah, no, there's none that's known right now. The closest thing is the Sultan's religious advisor. There's said to be an inscription on his tomb that said something about, and remember his adventure with a monk. And a number of people have said that refers to St. Francis. But as I looked at the Sultan, he knew a lot of monks. He did a lot of things with the Christians. So I don't think you can fairly say that that's even a reference. There's no Arab account, either Muslim or Christian, unfortunately. So it would certainly be nice to have it. And you never know, maybe something will surface someday still.
Yes, I believe there is, till now maybe there is no Islamic account or Islamic document about that. But maybe because, just I will say why, maybe because it was normal that the Muslims have such a kind of dialogue, and at the time of the Sultan with the Christian living in Egypt. So it was not something, something extraordinary at that time. While in the opposite side, which is the Crusades, yes, it was challenging from Saint Francis to do that and oppose all his military campaign and go and to make and talk in peace with the Sultan. I just, regarding this reference in some of the Arabic books, my professor yesterday emailed me because I was talking about that dialogue and that the story. He said there is a mention about that monk who met the Sultan in the Arabic text, but he said even he went to the source, but he didn't find it. Even he went to the Arabic source, he didn't find there is even something say that the Sultan met a monk.
I would hear a number of rumors when I was working on the book, and I would get very excited, but then none of them ever panned out. Yeah.
I have one more prepared question, and I think we might just kind of turn it over then to see if other people have questions. And I think this is a really common question that comes up for people in terms of, because of what we hear in the media and that. I mean, you, Mohammed, talked a lot about the passages for peace and peace building in the Quran, but then people also hear about jihad, and they say, is that not more common in there, and why do we hear so much about that? So could you maybe just kind of provide a response?
I hope this person didn't attend the previous discussion, because the previous discussion with Imam Shabir, he already answered a lot of things like that. But anyway, for those who always have this tendency to ask a question about jihad and terrorists and this type, I believe in my presentation wanted to say that Muslims are not terrorists. Invasion of Iraq, invasion of Afghanistan, there was no one single person, even according to the story, from Iraq or Afghanistan who did that issue or that crime. Anyway, Islam is a balanced relations. It doesn't say always you should, if someone attack you, you will be peaceful, let him kill you. No, Islam say defend yourself. So the jihad could come in under that meaning, defending your country, defending your religion, defending your people. So this is jihad, this is a kind of jihad, and it's also mentioned in the Quran. So I don't think the word jihad, hijacking an airplane, killing civilians, this is completely condemned by Islam, completely condemned by our religion. Prophet Muhammad prohibited killing children, women, monks, places of worship, even cutting a tree. We have ethics for war. And it is in the Quran and the Hadith and the same of that there are ethics for war. that now it is then international laws of war. So this my understanding for the issue of jihad and my answer for it. If it means defending your country, liberating your people, it's, personally I don't have any problem with that.
I certainly can't speak with any authority on Islam, but just in general, I guess we always notice that people will sometimes cherry pick through scripture to find what they want, and certainly in the time of the crusade, that was launched on, you know, supposed biblical grounds, that you could go back and read the documents of the Pope, and so, you know, I think that this, to some extent, the same thing may be happening with the scriptures in Islam, that people will cherry pick through to make their case, and you know, so.
Well, thank you. I think we have some time yet. Oh, was that a hand? Yeah. Okay. That was my first offer. I didn't even get the words out of my mouth yet. So, can I just have you kind of stand up maybe and ask one, or do you want the microphone?
No, I don't need the microphone.
Okay.
That last question actually came from my friend and I.
Okay.
And I would dispute the notion that one has to cherry pick through the Quran to find injunction after injunction to go out and to convert and to wage holy war against non-believers. The book has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of descriptions of how non-believers, non-acceptors of the word of Quran, of the word you know, portrayed by Muhammad, are going to hell. And if you don't accept, you're going to go to hell. And so it's very, very forceful. The message is pounded home, page after page after page, to go out and to convert the world to Islam. So the whole idea of bridge building and reconciliation and all these nice words that you use is not the message that I got when I read the Quran. It's not at all. It was pounding your fist down to say, go out and convert, because it's the only way you're going to get to heaven.
And I guess I would challenge that a bit in the sense that we have those same passages in the Bible. I mean, read Psalm 137, we talk about smashing the baby's heads in rocks. And so,
but that's the Old Testament. The New Testament, Jesus said, peace.
I recognize
do
that.
not kill, or, you know.
That's right. And I think you raise a good point, because, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about cherry picking. So we can look to our own texts, and we can pick our texts to say, which path are we going to choose?
But Jesus came to tell them what the real.
But excuse me if I can make a comment.
Yeah.
This is a serious issue, and I would like to thank you for saying this, because many people, they already have this, but hearing this thing, they are ashamed of saying it, and I'd like to thank you for this, for saying what you really think, and defending what you believe in, not get deceived by the Imam or by anyone else. I'm not here to say, like what they say in the biblical, how it's get used and abused, but what I'm really thinking, as I talked, and I prefer not to say it, but since you raised it, I will reply to this. That as a Muslim, we shouldn't be apologetic like to you or to anyone. How a girl like was asking me, I'm like a president of the club of Islamic Confirmation at the University of Law, and she came to me, she said, why like a girl in Afghanistan get killed because her father said whatever. I said, now you just come to me because the way I look, you know, like, I'd like to be honest. I told her, like, you know, like, whatever I will tell you, because I keep talking, and whatever I say, it's just rejected. I was like, honestly, to be frank, at that, like you were, like, why whatever I'm saying, and you look down at me, even the way you're speaking at me is not appropriate. I told her frankly, I'm not a white man. I don't have blonde hair, don't look like you. My country doesn't have like MIT, Stanford, and all these things, and we are not as civilized as this nation. So we are looked down upon anyway, but I'll flip the table on you. I'll like, why the people, like, I'll ask you now, who made the nuclear bomb and bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Muslim or Christians? Who invaded Iraq 1991 and killed 1 million kids, baby? Who invaded Vietnam and make the mess over there? Who invaded the crusade? Who did the crusade? Who invaded Afghanistan and bombarded people like animals? Even the animals is more respected here. Dogs are more respected than Muslim in Afghanistan or wherever. So who did this? Who did this? Who did this? And in response, I'll ask you, as of now, like, from what your information, what Muslim has done for non-Muslim? I'll answer for you. 9/11. What else? 9/11. What else? 9/11. Say something else. Me, I respect the fear that the Jew have for the Holocaust. Holocaust, yes, it was bad. What Hitler did was bad. But why is it Holocaust Museum in Toronto? It's big news, yes, but we have millions of Holocaust. We have millions. In Syria right now, children are slaughtered like animals. Like, what do you mean by animals? It's like halal, halal human. So you don't know what's happening in Syria. Why don't you cry for the 1 million kid that died in 1991? The American soldier in Iraq right now, they are putting like some verses of the Bible on their automatic guns. So my answer to you is that tell me what the Muslims have done in order to be looked upon. Forget about the text, okay? The text, there are people that talk about it, okay? I'm not a scholar that I can tell you on both sides. We can have a talk, but not as good as someone can represent it. But the way you're talking, that looks like Muslims are killing and corrupting the world. They're making pornography, spreading it, killing people in this, killing people in that. At the opposite, we have done anything but 9/11. Okay, if we say that Muslim did it, the conspiracy theory and all of this, but suppose we agree that Muslim did it, it's one. But who's, as I said, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 1991, just kids, 1 million kids in Iraq right now, they're bombarded, in Afghanistan, in Chechnya, in Bosnia, and I can tell you like endless list. So we haven't reached you guys and said, why you did this? Because, okay, it has been done by someone else. I won't condemn you for this. So that's my response. Like, before you talk, out of prejudice, out of, I don't know, psychology, like, superiority complex, whatever, regardless of the reason that brought you saying this, defend yourself and tell us what we did for you in order to say what you have said.
I'm going to say thank you both for sharing, because there are some tough questions, and I think, as we see from the story of St. Francis, it is messy at times. Now, I want to provide Muhammad an opportunity to respond, because I think that question is more directed at you, and Paul, please, if you want to as well.
Thank you for both. You got, I believe, you asked a question and you got your answer. But I will answer saying, Paul reminded me with another cartoon, okay? Just to break that tension that we had. And I'm not deceiving you, by the way. I'm bringing the side that we need to work with it in from our text, from our Quran. There is a cartoon movie about the rat who wanted to be a chief, a cook. So he wanted to cook for humans. His father said, come, and he took him on the street and showed him what the humans are doing for rats and killing hundreds of the rats, and said, no, we cannot do that. Anyway, it is a message. If you want to go and look to the side that you want and look to the empty part of the glass, it's up to you. If you go and want to go for the good history, as Dr. Professor Paul mentioned, that the Sultan, after the Crusades, killed and women and children, he freed them. He treated them kindly, and he was very nice to them. And this is what the Patriarch mentioned. We killed their women and their children, but they were good to us. There is a good message. There is no perfect human being among Muslims or among Christians. What about shooting in America, whatever? And that it's not Muslims, they are Christians, I'm Christian. So the idea of, I will answer your question about my book, the Quran. I mean, I will tell you that even a Muslim can't and have not the ability to write the Quran and understand it without the scholastic and the scholarly and knowledgeable ability. You can go and read the English translation, not the Arabic translation, the Arabic Quran, and want to get the message of that book. Because we believe as Muslims that book revealed to Prophet Muhammad by God through the Archangel Jibreel, and no one got that book from except learned by person. I learned Quran from my scholars. I have a chain till the Prophet Muhammad, a chain of people till Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad taught his companion taught his students, and students taught so and so, till now we have chain of narration till Prophet Muhammad. We learn it word by word, and what does it mean, and when you use that, and in which context you use that. It's not an easy field to go and read and say, oh, here is this and verse. I mean, Prophet Muhammad was fighting with the pagans, was fighting with people persecuting him. There's a lot of stories there. There's a lot of situations that you need to understand if you find some words or some ayat or some verses about jihad or about killing or and if you say that the Old Testament only is saying that, also the New Testament is saying that. Even Jesus said that. Bring all of them and slay under my feet, something like that. The issue is that I try to stress so much on my presentation on that idea. I am not here to debate. We are here to educate and say that we have good side in our books that we can use to move forward. We are here in Canada, in a local community, living in a peaceful community. We are not in the battlefield right now, in Iraq or Afghanistan or anywhere or Palestine. We are here now. Do we still have the same prejudice like as if we are in the battlefield, or we do something? We work with each other. We keep our biases aside, extending our hands to each other. This is my message that I believe in. I believe in that. I'm not deceiving or saying something to hide something. I don't feel anything. My book, I'm proud that I believe in my book and as a Muslim. But at the same time, this proudness is making that I have something that I can work with others. It gives me a light to do that.
Thank you. You know your New Testament. I think it's Luke 19, verse 23, because I looked that one up once too. It is there, yes. It's a story about a king and a parable. But yeah, in it, it's the king says, those who will not believe in me, bring them in and kill them in front of me. So again, we can pick the verses that we want to use. And what I have experienced personally is any of the Muslims I have met have picked those that offer peace.
Could I say something in response to the previous dialogue?
Sure.
It would seem to me the first question asks what you do when there's just words. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't quite satisfied with the answer, and I think the little bit of dialogue recently has kind of put the answer to it clearer for me. Okay. I think you don't bother with the dialogue. I think you work together, do things together, and the dialogue will happen in a different context. I don't think we're going to get very far very fast if we continue to debate. So when our kids go to school with each other and they play games with each other, that's when we'll make some progress.
Thank you.
I would agree. I don't try to argue which is a more peaceful religion. I think it's better to try to work at demonstrating, as you said, and I really love that, try to outdo the other. And are we capable of doing that? Okay, we are at 9:05 right now. I think we have time for a few more questions and comments. Thank you for your frankness. This is not easy. It really is not. So you have a...
Yeah, can I ask a question? I'm just wondering if Islam is compatible with liberal democracy and whether it's outdated, the fact that this is the 21st century and it's not really a conflict between religions, but it's a conflict between old and new. Is that really what we're talking about? Is that the issue? Or? being buried, the conflict between
Why you are looking to him? Do you fear him?
No,
You are expecting him to go and oh, here it is.
No, that's good. That still he wants to talk to me, though
Yes,
I was like replying.
I'm just wondering about, it's a structural problem within the religion.
I'll let maybe Paul, I'll let them comment first.
If I can add, like,
John?
again, it was like a question which might be on many people's mind, and if it is not sort of related only to Islam, but to both Christianity and Islam. Like, so if you both can respond to that.
I'm glad Paul's responding
Yes.
for me. I don't want to answer this one. I loved your story, but how to square with your daughter.
Yeah, I just think of, as a Catholic myself, I think of the history of the Catholic Church in the United States, and it was certainly portrayed as an enemy of democracy. And in fact, the people who said that could point to things the popes said in the 19th century against the idea of democracy and freedom of conscience. And so, you know, in living in New York, I sometimes see a parallel situation between things that happen now with Muslims and things that happened, you know, pretty well in the past with Catholics. So I can't really speak very well on Islam. We do see a movement towards democracy in much of the Islamic world right now that clearly comes from the hearts of the people. But I can't speak to actually what's in the Quran. But just looking at it as a Catholic, we see the same questions have been asked over time. It was only in the 1960s that the Church formally recognized freedom of conscience in terms of religion at the Second Vatican Council. So these things tend to develop over time, and you know what? The Church recognized that based on the intervention of American cardinals and theologians. America's, well, currently Canada, should I be saying this, all right? But what we have here on this side of the Atlantic is this kind of, it's influencing, I think, the religions too. So I wonder if that will even happen in Islam with what's happening here in North America, where people from so many different nationalities who are Muslims are gathered in one mosque. And that has to be having an impact on the whole religion, I think. But let me ask you.
Thank you. Regarding having a democratic state or liberal democratic state, Islam as a religion put norms and principles, especially regarding the government. But I just want to say that I want to just tell you that the Muslims are dreaming of Andalusia. In Spain, when the Muslims was in Spain for 800 years, and it was a light and science and advance in everything, that they transformed the knowledge that the West now and the civilization, the Western civilization are living on. That you can now go for Abyssinian, the first doctors, the Muslim physician. You go for Ibn Nafis, the one who discovered the blood circle in the body. You go for a lot. You will find that the Muslim added to that civilization that we are using it now. Even there is a very Hollywood movie, very short one, 15 minutes, by a very good famous actor about that. It was very interesting to see that when a teacher gave an assignment to his students, or her students, saying that I want you to search about the medieval area. So students said, what we are going to search in that time or that period is very bad. But they made the librarian, and he said, it is not the medieval area, it is the period, is a period of light. And he took them to the time, at that time when the Muslims were serving the humanity at large. And it was a college, it was a university in Andalusia that everyone comes, Jewish, Christian, learning and taking, studying. My university, Al-Azhar University, it used to be a school that Christian and Jewish come and study in it. Learn Arabic language, the dialogue, different fields of knowledge. And there was a professor everywhere. So the Muslims are dreaming of that era, that we come back and be very good like that. But But you know that the history that the Muslim went through colonial period, British, my country, occupied by the British, by the French, for 80 years. And then after that came imperialism. After the colonial period came the imperialism, the affecting and the Western domination. So we are hoping, we are just have, now my daughter, I was in America when the Egyptian revolution happened in Egypt. And I was dreaming to be there at that time because I suffered like any Egyptian, whether a Muslim or a Christian in Egypt, from the ruling of Mubarak's regime that has been supported for 30 years from the American and the Western society. 30 years they are supporting Mubarak while he's a dictator and a corrupted man. And now I hope to be there, and I didn't find except that I sent my daughter, the 4 years old or 5 years old, to the Tahrir Square with her uncle to be in the revolution. And I have her picture on the trunks and the tanks and with the soldiers. She was there. She was very young, and I'm very proud to have it. She one day she will remember that after 20, 30 years, she will know that she went to the Tahrir Square, and she will be proud that she helped it for building her country and having a good democratic country. We hope that. Democracy doesn't have a problem, Islam doesn't have a problem with the democracy, which means in our culture, our religion, means consultation. Sure, that the people have the right to choose the leaders. We don't have a problem with that meaning, that the people have the right to choose their leaders. Prophet Muhammad always gave that to the people to choose their leaders. He never opposed or, especially, I mean, this question is very theological. It needs, you have a background. When I want to explain, I can't. I need to explain, I want to go to the history, explain every the story, and there is a lot of issues. When we come to both theologically about democracy, a lot of our professors, Muslim scholars, wrote about democracy from an Islamic perspective. Yeah, I will say that we have some restriction in that democracy, but we still can take a lot with having a good, democratic, just country. Our religion doesn't have any problem with that. Working, choosing your leaders, choosing your president, having elections, all that process, as long as you don't forge the elections.
Joseph?
I just want to respond to the comment that was just made. I think it's extremely important that when we are gathered together in an interfaith dialogue setting, that we're also very careful in our choice of words. Language is an extremely powerful medium. And so when somebody uses exclusive language such as, is your faith outdated, I don't think it helps forward dialogue. It stalls dialogue, because you're making a judgment about somebody else's faith that you may not know enough about. It's the same way if somebody stood up here and said, is Christianity or Bible outdated? It's extremely wrong from my perspective to speak about someone else's tradition that way. Speaking to the issue of democracy, who says that the Western idea of liberal democracy is the epitome of definition of democracy? Who defines that? And why does everybody have to accept that kind of a definition as the normative definition of what democracy should look like? I think we should first address that question. Second is, I think if we want to talk from the perspective of religious scriptures, let's look at, do the Christian and the Muslim, in the context of this dialogue, somehow exclude basic principles of humanity, ethics, and dignity? If we find that the Quran and the Bible contradict on those basic foundations, which are the roots of what we call modern-day democracy, then you can question that. But if we know that within Christianity or within Islam, the fundamental principles are upholding the principles of ethics, justice, and dignity, then you can talk about various forms of language, call it liberal Western democracy or Eastern liberal democracy or conservative democracy or anything else. Speaking in terms of what the Muslims themselves have to say, Gallup polled in a study just a few years ago where they polled almost 1 billion Muslims trying to find out what do they think about democracy. and they could not find a shred of evidence from within the Muslim world where any Muslim opposed the idea of democracy in terms of upholding human dignity, social justice, human justice, basic values of living together as one humanity on this earth. But there wasn't any one particular definition of democracy that emerged out of there. And as an evidence, post that study is when the Tunisian revolution or the Egyptian revolution or the Yemeni revolution happened. So those people didn't learn how to ask for dignity from Western liberal democracy. So let's give some credit to the people who are really fighting for their existence, for dignity and justice all around the world.
Thank you, Idrissa. I think I'm going to suggest that we need to wrap up, and I want to give our speakers one more kick at the can. And as we see, as you identified earlier, Paul, things were pretty bad back then. And yet, we have an example here of one person who said, I think I can make a difference. And this is what I'm going to do. And so what I think we also recognize is that, yeah, it's not as bad, but we still mistrust each other. We still have stereotypes about each other. So I guess the question I'm going to put to both of you is, what can we do as individuals to, I guess, live in the spirit of St. Francis?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you all so much for being here. You've been a wonderful audience and offered some really excellent comments and questions, and I really enjoyed the exchange that we've had here. You know, I think the story of Francis boils down to that each of us can make a difference in some way. Maybe a small way, maybe in a way we won't even ever realize. But he was just one person who decided, who thought to himself, what can I do? And he risked a lot, but he crossed over and just tried to interact with the other side. And just by participating, looking at, each of us looking at our own actions, I think those actions have a lot of impact, more than we know. It's funny when I read the stories of some of the famous terrorists, oftentimes they were people who came to the US and they were students and got turned off, got isolated, and it took a series of interactions with other people. That maybe there was some point where they wouldn't have followed that path even. So we never know, what difference each of us can make. But I think that Francis acted as an individual very much so, and that we can too.
I also want to thank all of you, and I don't have a problem with any question. And really, when you have a dialogue, I was telling Paul before we come that I'm expecting questions about jihad, I'm expecting questions about terrorism, I'm expecting some question like that. So what do you think our story could say about these issues? And he really said, if we don't have dialogue, and if we don't have interfaith dialogue, the alternative is to continue the warfare. So I think that we need to overcome these issues and about violence. And my children are in the school. My daughter are in the school. I have two daughters who go to the Canadian school. Now they will be Canadians. So, some 2 years, some after a while, they will be. I will speak with them in Arabic, and they will speak with me in English. There's a way. There's the way our children are growing up here, and they are taking all the norms from that society. And so we should know that we should educate ourselves, we should work with each other. I will not say come to build hospitals, because already in Canada there is a health care, not like in America, but I will say let us build a shelter. There's a lot of people outside there, they need to have a shelter and be taking care of them. We can do that with each other. We can work with each other for the purpose and the good for our society. This is my really message, and this is really my idea about being here. If I want something else, I will leave that country. But because I am here, I have a message. And my message is to do the good for all people, with no difference. As long as they are sharing with me the same. Even if they don't share me the same, I will do the best, as my religion is teaching me. Thank you, and I appreciate that. And please forgive me for anything that I may bother you or you don't like. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to hand the microphone over to Nathan, but the one thing I'm going to ask you to do is, most of you have yellow sheets, and if you don't, there's some at the back. And Osman is reminding me, and I was going to remember, as well as baklava, if you want to stay up a few more hours yet, they also have some wonderful, wonderful Turkish coffee that you can indulge in as well. But please take a moment and fill this out and hand it in, because one of the things we want to try to understand is, how do we make these events better? And anything you can say would be helpful. Nathan?
I would just like to thank everyone for turning out this evening. Perhaps we're venturing even a little outside of your comfort zone to come to a type of event or to a place you don't always come. I think far too often we content ourselves with talking about one another, but not really talking to or with one another. And I think this evening it's a good model for the types of relationships we can try to create, trying a little harder to start communication like this, let it continue, try to be in relationship rather than out of relationship. And
if anyone wants to have a question very badly, come to me in Kitchen Message or email me or anything.
Great, so we can have some open doors and continuing conversations.